The views expressed in this episode, as with all episodes of the podcast, are purely host opinions. The content on this podcast should not be taken as indisputable fact. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only.
And it's another warm welcome to the Full Bottle podcast for all our listeners out there. My name is Sarah Porter. I'm a co-host of the Full Bottle podcast with Rachel Hall. Hi, Rach. Lovely to be here again.
Hello, everybody. It's a Thursday where we're recording, but whenever you're listening to us, I hope it's a good day anyway.
Rach, you've been on the move a bit lately. You've been throughout Queensland with the team. You've been on the move a fair bit. How did all of that go?
It was great. It's great to get out. I haven't been traveling in quite a while, so it's been great to, see a bit more of my home state, get up to the north, get down to the south out in the Gayndah, Mundubba region. It's tiring, but it's great work and it's great to meet everyone. I feel like I'm so much smarter now. I've learned so much. It's incredible.
That's awesome.
But yeah, fantastic.
Good on you. Good on you. And the team's been over to the Riverina as well, with a very successful growers forum over there. Everyone is sounding pleased as punch with how that one went. Now, with forums, one of the key Citrus Australia staff that goes along to these when he's able to is David Daniels, and we're talking to David next about his job, about how long he's been with Citrus Australia, and why it is that his job is so important for the industry. So we'll go over to David now. We're going to welcome Dave Daniels to the podcast. Dave, thank you so much for joining us. It's super to have you here on the Full Bottle. First of all, can you tell our listeners, Dave, what your official title is at Citrus Australia?
General Manager, Market Development is what my title is, but I suppose I do every conceivable issue related to citrus. That's part of the deal when we're part of a small company.
Yep, fantastic. And how long have you been with Citrus Australia?
In a month from now, I'll be coming up to my 12th, I'll complete 12 years with Citrus Australia. Started at the end of 2012.
12 years, that's a good long stretch, isn't it? You started your career in the restaurant game as a chef. What was the pull for you to move away from that industry and into ours?
Oh, look, that's an interesting one. I really love the work. Like I've got a real passion for food. I've had that since I was really young. Like my first job was, grating cheese in a pizza shop when I was, too young to be working, to be honest. I was not even of working age, but things were a bit different in those days. But I suppose I got to an age in my life, look, you don't see old chefs anymore. Like most go on to, work in sales, work in food service. The really successful ones become TV personalities and all that, but the hours end up killing you. It's largely unrewarding in the end, putting a lot of hours in, double shifts, 16-hour days and things like that. So
yeah,
you can only do that as a young person, and I was getting older, so I made a decision when I was about 27, 28 years old to go to university.
And what did you study?
I studied a Bachelor of Science, food technology major, and I'd sort of had, because I think I had that background as a pastry chef, I sort of felt that it was linked in some way, and it sort of was. But I sort of, when I took that job, did that university degree, I sort of had pictured myself working in manufacturing, in canneries and things like that.
Yeah.
Or a big company like Sara Lee or McCain or something like that in product development.
Gosh.
But it never went that way. I got involved before I'd finished university. I got offered a job at the local research station with the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries in post-harvest horticulture. So one thing led to another, and I've sort of ended up with Citrus Australia. But yeah, I didn't end up doing anything to do with manufacturing really, and got straight into research as I left university.
Oh, it's an incredible move from one industry to the other, but it's got some obvious links there for you. So I'm sure you found eventually that you found your spot pretty comfortably with Citrus Australia. How would you describe your role to someone who doesn't know anything about the citrus industry? How would you describe your role?
Yeah, well, it's pretty varied. Like, really, what I was initially brought in for was to, like, I'll go back a step and say that, to get fruit from our country in Australia into overseas markets, there's a lot of pitfalls and potholes along the way. There's a lot of regulatory conditions you need to meet, whether that be quarantine conditions, food safety conditions, chemical residue conditions, labeling, other specifications, even down to what type of pallets you're allowed to use and what temperature things have to be shipped at. And the industry exports to about 50 different markets. And a lot of those things actually put a real handbrake on the trade and make it, in some cases, damn near impossible to do. So when I was brought
Yeah.
in 12 years ago, my job was to expand on the number of markets we could export to, but also iron out a lot of those potholes and make some of those to try and strip back, work with governments to try and strip back some of those quite onerous and difficult conditions. So that was primarily, but like as the trade goes on, also there's a lot of distressed cargoes, a lot of things go wrong along the way. Right down to a little labeling error can cost a business hundreds of thousands of dollars when the fruit arrives in market. It's not labeled right, or it's the wrong temperature, or things like that are happening all the time. So I spent a lot of time resolving issues with distressed cargo, and look, have to maintain and cultivate the right relationships in government for that to happen. So it's really my job to know who to go and talk to, and of course, those people in governments are always rotating and moving around the place. So, it's a full-time job just to stay on top of those relationships.
So what have been we'll go to some of the greatest challenges that you've faced before, but first of all, let's focus on some positive things. What have been some of the most exciting times for you over the 13 years that you've spent with Citrus Australia?
Oh, look, there's no denying it's been an incredibly exciting time for me. When I started, I really didn't know what was possible and what was achievable. At that point, the industry was on its knees. I won't say on its knees. They were struggling because they'd had a big, successful 10 to 15 years with exports to the USA. But what happened around the early to mid 2010, so around 2006, Chile entered the USA market and so did South Africa. And so our market share there plummeted. But of course, all the industry had adjusted their product mix or their plantings to in line with demand that was in the USA, and I think nobody thought that was ever going to come to an end. So we reached the point where we had all these plantings coming on, all this volume coming on, and lost the USA market. And I mean, it was decimated very quickly with the entry of Chile. So we had this big volume of navel oranges coming on and really without a home. And I remember at that time, the domestic market was just absolute bedlam. So I came into the market into the role at that time, and at the same time, I was seeing pretty good success in Japan. Japan was really climbing as a market, and it was quite high returning. So I mean, the answer I had was we needed another Japan. That's clearly what we needed. And the real shining light there was China. China was opening up as a market, but there was a lot of technical barriers that made it still very difficult to enter that market or to send fruit, and quite literally, it was very difficult for growers, packers, and exporters to even understand what those conditions were. So we set about on a program to help our industry understand those conditions and fulfill those conditions and make sure that they met all the checks and balances by government in order to export. And that was probably a 5-year undertaking, really. It's setting up an administrative system around that, and orchards and packing houses being registered to export to China. So we saw very quickly the trade boom. So we basically we went from nearly naught, I think around the year 2012, we might have seen a mere 1,000 tons exported to China. And by, I think 2017, well, we hit our peak in 2019 at 111, 113,000 tonnes. So naught to
Gosh.
113,000 tonnes in probably about 5 or 6 years. And that was a real relief valve for the industry. But of course, people have responded to that and planted more trees on the basis that China would keep going. So we're in a little bit, I won't say we're in trouble. I wouldn't say ring the alarm bells, but China's slowed down a little bit with what's going on in China and the impacts of COVID. So we aren't hitting those numbers that we did in 2019. So we are in a little bit of a difficult or a funny situation now where the plantings are coming on and China isn't quite what it was. Nevertheless, there's very, very good sentiment out there. So, look, seeing exports grow, if I go back to 2012, I think I recall the export volume around that time was 150,000 times total for all export markets. And by 2019, we exceeded 300,000 tonnes. So seeing a doubling of the export volume. And, of course, I can't possibly claim all this credit for that success, but I can say much of it wouldn't have happened without the efforts we put in. Most certainly the government, while there's some great people in government, they weren't really capable of managing the accreditation and the administration around checking, putting all the checks and balances in orchards and training all the growers to do certain activities. That wasn't something they were particularly good at, so we stepped in and took that role, and we've worked very closely with government in that time. And what's some of the other success? I think what I'm probably most proud of is the relationship we've cultivated with the Department of Agriculture in Canberra. There's such an important part, rightly or wrongly, or like it or not. The Department of Agriculture is such an important component of our value chain because they provide the certification to allow our goods to leave the country and enter other countries. They've got to put their stamp on it. And if there's not the right checks and balances, that stamp literally means nothing and it erodes, I suppose, their brand. So in the past, the relationships between organisations or peak industry bodies like us and government has been quite, I suppose, I don't know quite the word. They were adversaries. Probably a bit confronting. And we've changed that. We really have. We've got some great people. Like, contrary to common belief, there's some really good public servants in Canberra. Our job is to find out which, not all, but there are some really good guys there and girls, and our job is to identify which ones are good and work really closely with them and maintain that relationship. And as I said earlier, they move on. So we've got to constantly work at maintaining those relationships with the right people in government, because when things go wrong, if half a dozen containers show up in Japan and there's been a labelling error, we need to know we've got a good relationship with someone who's prepared to help us and try and unravel that mistake.
Get it through.
Quite literally, it is hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars at stake. And in the past, those people weren't always happy to help us. But this time around, we've really got some great people there.
Made the friendships. Yeah,
that's
so
excellent. Proud of
One
that.
of the things, very proud of that.
Fairly high level of mutual respect there, and I'm pretty proud to say that.
That's excellent. Do you know what? Well, you obviously know that Rach and I are new to the citrus game. I think one of the most eye-opening things she and I saw at an export facility that we visited was the labelling requirements to get produce into all sorts of different countries. But I think one of the ones that I was just standing next to the label in the factory, and it had not only the size of writing, but the exact font that had to be used on the name of this particular country, which we just couldn't believe how specific those labelling requirements were.
That's what I'm getting at. Little mistakes like that can cost someone hundreds of thousands. If you imagine times that by 6 containers where the font size on the pallet label is wrong, and these countries can be quite literal. You have broken the law. We're very sorry, but the rules are the rules, and that is the rule, and you have broken the rule. And it comes down to silly little things, like one that catches people out from time to time is Japan requires. Now, I've got to be careful I don't get around the wrong way. So don't cite me on this. Is, for instance, it's supposed to say for Japan on the pallet. Some people write to Japan, and that in some cases or in the past has been a problem. and we have to get the embassy staff to apologise profusely, and they say, okay, we'll let it in just this time, don't do it again. But 4 or 2 can make the difference, and it can be $1 million mistake.
It's quite something, isn't it? That really is astounding.
And quite often there's no logical reason to any of this stuff. We just have to accept that's the way it is. If you want to trade, just follow the rules. It's okay.
The rules.
And that's my job. I obviously can't recite every rule or remember every rule, but I at least need to know where to go to find those rules.
Yeah, fantastic. I think you've combined some of your most exciting times with some of the greatest challenges that you've faced. The travel that you've done most recently with the team included Rach was lucky enough to stay in her home state and get into far north Queensland and southern Queensland there. And as a newbie to the industry, like me, she did come back and tell me that she found that your knowledge of the export game was just second to none, and she couldn't learn more from you as you were walking around certain spots there. So I am going to hand over to Rach now to let her throw some wobbly questions at you about that trip and a few other things. Over to you, Rach.
Thanks, Sarah. Good to see you, Dave. Well, let's stay on the topic of the forums. Dave, did you have any highlights? I know you probably spent a lot of time over the years traveling. It probably can get a bit, a little bit tiring after a while, but how did you feel going up there to Far North Queensland?
Look, Far North Queensland's a bit of a different one for me because I'm focused on really the I suppose the export end of the value chain. That's where my skill set lies, at that end of the value chain. And so Nathan and the others in the team are more versed at again, down the bottom end in the production and packing side of the value chain. Look, Far North Queensland is not historically really an export region. They're predominantly lime growers that grow mostly limes, lemons, limes, and grapefruit for the domestic market. So not a big part of the sector up there. But it sort of blew me away to see the volumes coming on up there and the investment up there in that region, especially with capital coming in from foreign sources, I suppose, or overseas people coming in with large amounts of capital and taking it really serious up there. We saw some very well managed, very professional orchards and packers up there as well. So really quite exciting to see the enthusiasm and the investment in that region.
Do you find that those forums, not only for you to get to see all of this, but also for the growers who get together and meet all of us and hear some of the stuff we have to say? Do you think that it is important and people are getting good value out of it from what you've heard?
Oh, look, I've just returned from Griffith just yesterday, and we had a very successful there in one of the packing houses. There was well over 60 people, probably closer to 70 people attended. I think for me, the real value in the forums is that the growers and other parts of the industry are given confidence that we've got our finger on the pulse and doing the things that are important for them. We let them know what we're up to, and that's a two-way street. They're able to provide input into our work program and help us focus on the things that are important to them. Look, it was a really interesting forum in Griffith. Probably one of the first times I've been up there when things are so optimistic. They're predominantly, I won't say predominantly, they've got a very big sector of citrus industry that grows predominantly for juice, and juice has been a struggling industry over the last couple of decades. It's had its highs and lows, but you'd have to say on average it's been very difficult for anyone growing specifically for juice. But that's really all changed in the last 18 months, and I don't think anyone really saw it coming. We sort of predicted it, but the South America or Brazil is really struggling now with the impacts of the greening disease or Huanglongbing disease, where it's to the point where it's starting to it's impacting on production quite badly. The signature crop of Florida has been, I suppose you'd have to say, decimated. As I said, it's its big crop. I don't even know, flagship crop, I should say, in in Florida is citrus, and it's been decimated probably to around 10% of what it once produced. So there is a global shortage of juice concentrate and not for concentrate juice, which is really working in our favour. So so at the same time, we've got pretty good demand in export markets. So I can sort of see a storm brewing, or a little bit of a war. I wouldn't say war, friendly competition between the packers and the processors, because they both want the fruit. And it works well for us. Look, we've seen incredible, good expansion of plantings, but of course, the export markets are typically looking for that, the cream of the crop, the best quality. We've always been concerned, well, what else do you do with, you put more trees in, yeah, sure, you get a lot of good quality fruit, but what do you do with all that sort of lower grade fruit, the smaller stuff and less popular sizes? And the answer for that now is, wow, there's, good supply there for juice, and they're paying really good money, probably money that no one would have expected to see in the past. That said, they're hearing good money, but the challenges are there. Look, the biggest challenge these days is the cost of production. Largely labour is really hurting the industry. Cost of picking is a big one. It's such a hands-on game. We haven't really got there to automate that or have robots do it, so it's still very labour intensive. So while they're good at getting good money, we've got to be careful about singing from the rooftops how wonderful it is or how wonderful the export trade is, because the cost of production is getting harder and harder, and with not a lot of light on the horizon there.
Yeah, definitely. I want to talk a little bit about, I guess, change. So change in the industry over the time that you've been in it, particularly from a market access standpoint. It kind of sounds like that everything can can just change on a dime, and growers and producers and the whole industry kind of has to pivot if something changes overseas, or in terms of market access regulation, or even agrochemical regulation. You were doing a lot of updates on that throughout the various forums. What do you think the impact of, I guess, change and those fast changes are to people on the ground in both market access and then also agrochemical, because they're quite connected, I would assume?
Yeah, look, I think what my observation over the last decade at least has been, we're heading towards a more professional, well-oiled, probably larger production units. That's what we're seeing, rightly or wrongly, where we're seeing, even when people want to sell farms, they generally acquire the neighbours, then sell, because, investors are looking for large packets of land. So we are seeing larger, more professional, the cost of compliance and the compliance requirements in business, the demands for that are becoming more and more each year, to the point where really there's no shortcuts anymore. It's, 10 years ago or more, there were shortcuts to be taken, but it's really difficult to take those shortcuts. And, I'm talking about compliance across the whole chain, where we've got food safety, you've got agrochemical compliance, sustainability credentials are coming into it. A typical business these days that is just packing fruit for domestic and export markets, you're looking at, close to, if not more, 12 audits a year from various different entities, government organisations, whether it be state government, Commonwealth government, and the food safety audits on top of that. And it really is out of hand, to be quite honest with you. This stuff was initially devised to sort of say, come on, guys, just don't take shortcuts, do a good job. But it's just the record keeping and documentation is just incredible, and the cost of demonstrating that stuff is just growing more and more. I think, to me, that's the killer. With agrochemicals, that's a really tough one. I think from consumers and governments the world over are expecting to see the same sort of volume of food produced. We've got the same food requirements, if not more, globally as populations increase, but they're expecting it to be done with fewer chemical inputs. Now, it's an admirable sentiment. I get that people want to know that that harmful chemicals aren't being used. But look, if the fact of the matter is, we need chemical inputs to produce food on the sort of scale that we need to feed the world. And if we didn't, more than a third of the crops would fail, and we'd have famines like we did in the old feudal days. It's just not that simple. But we do want to make sure that the chemicals we are using are safe to the user first and foremost, and the consumer, but also on the environment, and don't have impact. So what we're seeing the world over being largely driven in Europe, and we can sort of reasonably predict what's going to happen in other countries because Europe does make changes to their agrochemical policies, and the world seems to gradually follow later. It's becoming more and more strict. So we're not just losing individual molecules, we're losing whole classes of molecules, and there's not actually that many, and we're not discovering too many new actives. So, and the challenge for Australia is we're a very small market. So there's really only 6 big agrochemical companies globally now, and they've only got limited R&D budgets to put into doing the R&D and the regulatory approvals, and they're more likely to invest in overseas markets that are bigger, where they're going to sell more products than Australia. So we're at this really difficult, especially for citrus, because we're big, but we're not that big on global terms. In Australian terms, we're very big. We're bigger than most other industries. I think certainly the largest fruit industry, but in global terms, not so much. So we're seeing the likes of Bayer and other companies like that. They're very committed to Australia. I will say, I'm not taking anything away from that. You just think logically they're more likely to commit to markets, big markets like the US, where they're going to sell much more product for the same amount of effort. It's sort of the same amount of regulatory requirements to meet regulatory compliance overseas than it is in Australia. So, if a market like California is 6 times the size of here, naturally they'll invest over there. That doesn't mean we don't keep trying. It's a bit like I was talking about government before. I spend an awful lot of time cultivating and maintaining relationships with the right people, the product development managers and the marketing people in the big 6 agrochemical companies, and they're moving around all the time. So again, that's a bit of a job, full-time job, just to maintain contact as people move on. You've got to make sure you're being introduced to the new guy as they come on board, and then go all through it again. These are our priorities. These are our concerns. These are the risks going forward. This is what we need, and have to go through that process routinely with these guys.
Yeah, definitely. There's just so much to it. I guess like I said, you've been around for a while. You've been visiting growers for a while. You've seen directly the impacts of all of these changes. And you've obviously stayed in this job for quite a while, so obviously you really enjoy it. And what's something that you see within the industry, or something that you see from growers, or anything similar to that? What makes you want to do your job well?
Oh, look, I get a real grin out of just seeing that export number double. But, if I get a phone call with someone with, a detained consignment in Japan or Thailand because of some, silly regulation, like I mentioned, the 2 Japan, 4 Japan issue I mentioned earlier, but sometimes it might be an agrochemical residue issue that even the Thai authorities aren't even reading their own regulations correctly, and if I will work to resolve. So I get a real grin out of a real buzz out of fixing those problems. If I can save someone $200,000 or $300,000 for a day's work and writing a few letters and emails and chasing, that stuff's really rewarding. Unfortunately, we don't get those wins all that often, but they come up periodically. Certainly when I get to improve a market access requirement, and those things have happened over the years, where we can make just a minor change to an import policy, and that can have quite a big impact on the volume of fruit that goes out of this country by reducing bottlenecks. For instance, a few years ago, the Korean authorities used to require us to inspect 1% of the export fruit before, physical inspection, 1% of the fruit, and we were able to reduce that down to 600 units from 1%. And that's a massive thing. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it means the throughput through a single facility in a day was probably multiplied by about 4. And we see the volumes today and we think, gee, that would not be conceivable under the old 2% rule. We just wouldn't be able to get the fruit through the facility. And another one was, having to have a Korean officer supervise the loading of the container as they were loading. And you can just imagine how slow that is, loading pallet by pallet, having someone stand there. We remove that requirement. Again, that increases the amount of throughput through a single facility. So we've seen volumes into Korea go. So it's examples like that I really get a grin out of. And look, a lot of the time the stakeholders, the growers, the packers don't even know that's happened behind the scenes. So in converse, it's a little bit disappointing when you put a lot of work in and something good happens, but it's really hard to promote that success. People wouldn't really even know that was the case.
Yeah, yeah. You'll have to start telling us a bit more, Dave, so we can blast successes like that out on social media channels and put it in the newsletter and the magazine and tell everybody.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we're here for. It's our whole job. Speaking of getting a grin out, let's finish this up just with a more casual question. What else gives you a grin in your life? Family. I know you're a big surfer. You enjoy a bit of a surf out there where you are.
Yeah. Surfing is the biggest part of my life outside of work. I think it's been a bit difficult the last few weeks. We haven't had great weather conditions, and with all the travel, it's been hard to find any momentum. I'm typically an early morning surfer, but recovering from travel like today and trying to get a bit of a sleep in to catch up on a few hours sleep makes it hard. But look, my family is everything to me. I've got quite a spread of children. My oldest is 22. My next one's 11 and my next one's 6. So it's quite a spread. We've raised a child, then raise another one, then raise another one. My children are my world to me. That's all I got to say about that.
No, that's lovely. That's amazing.
It's awesome. The way it should be.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you very much, Dave, for sharing, so much about your life and your work and what you love. It's been really great hearing all of your insights. It's fantastic.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, Dave, especially at the end of a very busy week. And again, that was David Daniels, who's our export expert. How's that? David Daniels with Citrus Australia. It was great to listen to all the ins and outs of his jobs and where some of the challenges lie and some of the most exciting moments that he's had in his career so far. We can't wait to find out who we're going to interview next for the Full Bottle podcast rate. So if you're listening to this podcast and you've obviously found us, but there's a few people out there who aren't that sure about how to listen. So if you're listening and you've got some friends who've been asking you how to listen, Rachel's going to tell you exactly where you can find us.
Well, first of all, if you go to our social media, if you're able to access that, there's been a post that's put up recently with step-by-step guides on how to get to us. There's a QR code you can scan and methods on how you can listen to us. But as of right now, if you visit Linktree/The Full Bottle, you'll be able to find us. You'll select the Full Bottle tab, and then you get to choose one of 6 platforms to listen to us: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Podbean, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, or Samsung. And then you can pick whichever one you prefer. It tends to be often Apple Podcasts or Spotify that everyone really likes. And then you go in, you can follow us, you can listen to us, and you can also rate our show. You should definitely give us a 5-star review because we're that good.
Please give us a rating and make it a nice one if you can.
Yeah,
also, we'd love to hear from you. Please do reach out to us and let us know what you'd like to hear about or from in the coming months. You can find us via the Citrus Australia website. Our details are up there. And Rach, I think we should remind everybody about the upcoming Congress next year.
Yes, the Australian Citrus Congress held in the Riverina. It'll be from the 18th to the 20th of March. Currently, our partnership prospectus is out. So if you're a company and you're looking to, give us some sponsorship money so we can put on a great day, then definitely get on to us, check out the prospectus and book now while there's still spots available.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rach. Great to hear from you. Great to have a chat with Dave Daniels. And we can't wait to come back next time.
Have a good one, everyone. Bye.
Bye.